Hello, and welcome as Zenith Players presents chapters 12 and 13 of The Hound of the Baskervilles. I'm Claire, and I'm the artistic director of Zenith Players. All of the actors that you will be hearing tonight are volunteering their time and their talents from their own homes and maintaining proper social distancing to entertain you in your own home. Some of them have just met each other for the first time about 15 minutes ago when we first logged into this Zoom meeting. And whether it's for the first time or the 10th time reading with us, we want to thank them for joining us. We would like to send a very lovely big thank you out to your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare for hosting us on his page. And we would encourage you to check out his website at shakespeareapproves.com. Please check out his Patreon at patreon.com/Shakespeare. And we are looking forward to his June production in 2 days' time, June 3rd at 7:05 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, A Gay Old Time. And we will be providing links to his content in our comments. We would like to state that our hearts go out to everyone demonstrating and their families of everyone affected in the cities where the demonstrations are currently happening right now. We would like to extend our support to those who are protesting at this time. We hope that you can stay safe. We also hope that we can provide a momentary distraction from any current events. If you would like more information about our totally volunteer organization, please check out our website, zenithplayers.com. Feel very free to check out our attractive donations page. 100% of all donations go toward production costs, which at this time go toward the various subscriptions that are needed to keep the website up and running and streaming services. If you would like to join us in future productions, please send us an email at casting@zenithplayers.com and we'll get you on board. Join us on Saturday for our upcoming reader series of Julius Caesar. And please join us for our final edition of The Hound of the Baskervilles next Monday. In the meantime, I will hand you over to the cast of Hound of the Baskervilles.
Chapter 12, Death on the Moor.
It is a lovely evening, my dear Watson. I really think that you will be more comfortable outside than in.
For a moment or two, I sat breathless, hardly able to believe my ears. Then my senses and my voice came back to me, while a crushing weight of responsibility seemed in an instant to be lifted from my soul. That cold, incisive, ironical voice belonged to but one man in the whole world. Holmes! Holmes!
Come out, and please, be careful with the revolver.
I stooped under the rude lintel, and there he sat upon a stone outside, his grey eyes dancing with amusement as they fell upon my astonished features. He was thin and worn, but clear and alert, his keen face bronzed by the sun and roughened by the wind. In his tweed suit and cloth cap, he looked like any other tourist upon the moor, and he had contrived with that cat-like love of personal cleanliness, which was one of his characteristics, that his chin should be as smooth and his linen as perfect as if he were in Baker Street. I never was more glad to see anyone in my life.
Or more astonished, eh?
Well, I must confess to it.
The surprise was not all on one side, I assure you. I had no idea that you had found my occasional retreat, still less that you were inside it until I was within 20 paces of the door.
My footprint, I presume?
No, Watson, I fear that I could not undertake to recognize your footprint amid all the footprints of the world. If you seriously desire to deceive me, you must change your tobacconist, for when I see the stub of a cigarette marked Bradley, Oxford Street, I know that my friend Watson is in the neighborhood. You will see it there beside the path. You threw it down, no doubt, at that supreme moment when you charged into the empty hut.
Exactly.
I thought as much, and knowing your admirable tenacity, I was convinced that you were sitting in ambush, a weapon within reach, waiting for the tenant to return. So you actually thought that I was the criminal?
I did not know who you were, but I was determined to find out.
Excellent, Watson. And how did you localize me? You saw me, perhaps, on the night of the convict hunt, when I was so imprudent as to allow the moon to rise behind me.
Yes, I saw you then.
And have no doubt searched all the huts until you came to this one.
No, your boy had been observed, and that gave me a guide where to look.
The old gentleman with the telescope, no doubt. I could not make it out when I first saw the light flashing upon the lens. I see that Cartwright has brought up some supplies. What's this paper? So you've been to Coombe Tracy, have you?
Yes,
To see Mrs. Laura Lyons.
exactly.
Well done. Our researchers have evidently been running on parallel lines, and when we unite our results, I expect we shall have a fairly full knowledge of the case.
Well, I'm glad from my heart that you are here, for indeed the responsibility and the mystery were both becoming too much for my nerves. But how in the name of wonder did you come here, and what have you been doing? I thought you were in Baker Street working out that case of blackmailing.
That is what I wished you to think.
Then you use me, and yet do not trust me. I think that I've deserved better at your hands, Holmes.
My dear fellow, you have been invaluable to me in this as in many other cases, and I beg that you will forgive me if I have seemed to play a trick upon you. In truth, it was partly for your own sake that I did it, and it was my appreciation of the danger which you ran which led me to come down and examine the matter for myself. Had I been with Sir Henry and you, it is confident that my point of view would have been the same as yours, and my presence would have warned our very formidable opponents to be on their guard. As it is, I have been able to get about as I could not possibly have done had I been living in the hall, and I remain an unknown factor in the business, ready to throw in all my weight at the critical moment.
But why keep me in the dark?
For you to know could not have helped us, and might possibly have led to my discovery. You would have wished to tell me something, or in your kindness you would have brought me out some comfort or other, and so an unnecessary risk would be run. I brought Cartwright down with me. You remember the little chap at the express office? He has seen after all my simple wants, a loaf of bread and a clean collar. What does man want more? He has given me an extra pair of eyes upon a very active pair of feet, and both have been invaluable.
Then my reports have all been wasted.
Oh, here are your reports, my dear fellow, and very well thumbed, I assure you. I made excellent arrangements, and they are only delayed 1 day upon their way. I must compliment you exceedingly upon the zeal and the intelligence which you have shown over an extraordinarily difficult case.
I was still rather raw over the deception which had been practiced upon me, but the warmth of Holmes' praise drove my anger from my mind. I felt also in my heart that he was right in what he said, and that it was really for the best for our purpose that I should not have known he was upon the moor.
That's better. And now, tell me the result of your visit to Mrs. Laura Lyons. It was not difficult for me to guess that it was to see her that you had gone, for I am already aware that she is the one person in Coombe Tracy who might be of service to us in the matter. In fact, if you had not gone today, it is exceedingly probable that I should have gone tomorrow.
Sun had set, and dusk was settling over the moor. The air had turned chill, and we withdrew into the hut for warmth. There, sitting together in the twilight, I told Holmes of my conversation with the lady. So interested was he that I had to repeat some of it twice before he was satisfied.
This is most important. It fills up a gap which I had been unable to bridge in this most complex affair. You are aware, perhaps, that a close intimacy exists between this lady and the man Stapleton?
I did not know of a close intimacy.
There can be no doubt about the matter. They meet, they write. There is a complete understanding between them. Now, this puts a very powerful weapon into our hands. If I could only use it to detach his wife.
His wife?
I am giving you some information now in return for all that you have given me. The lady who has passed here as Miss Stapleton is in reality his wife.
Good heavens, Holmes. Are you sure of what you say? How could he have permitted Sir Henry to fall in love with her?
Sir Henry's falling in love could do no harm to anyone except Sir Henry. He took particular care that Sir Henry did not make love to her, as you have yourself observed. I repeat that the lady is his wife and not his sister.
But why this elaborate deception?
Because he foresaw that she would be very much more useful to him in the character of a free woman.
All my unspoken instincts, my vague suspicions, suddenly took shape and centered upon the naturalist. And that impassive, colorless man with his straw hat and his butterfly net, I seemed to see something terrible, a creature of infinite patience and craft, with a smiling face and a murderous heart. It is he, then, who is our enemy. It is he who dogged us in London.
So I read the riddle.
And the warning, it must have come from her.
Exactly.
But are you sure of this, Holmes? How do you know that the woman is his wife?
Because he so far forgot himself as to tell you a true piece of autobiography upon the occasion when he first met you, and I dare say he has many a time regretted it since. He was once a schoolmaster in the north of England. Now, there is no one more easy to trace than a schoolmaster. There are scholastic agencies by which one may identify any man who has been in the profession. A little investigation showed me that a school had come to grief under atrocious circumstances, and that the man who had owned it, the name was different, had disappeared with his wife. The descriptions agreed. When I learned that the missing man was devoted to entomology, the identification was complete.
If this woman is in truth his wife, where does Mrs. Laura Lyons fit in?
That is one of the points upon which your own researchers have shed a light. Your interview with the lady has cleared the situation very much. I did not know about a projected divorce between herself and her husband. In that case, regarding Stapleton as an unmarried man, she counted no doubt upon becoming his wife.
And when she's undeceived?
Why, then we may find the lady of service. It must be our first duty to see her, both of us, tomorrow. Don't you think, Watson, that you are away from your charge rather long? Your place should be at Baskerville Hall.
One last question, Holmes. Surely there's no need of secrecy between you and me. What is the meaning of it all? What is he after?
It is murder, Watson. Refined, cold-blooded, deliberate murder. Do not ask me for any particulars. My nets are closing upon him, even as his are upon Sir Henry. And with your help, he is already almost at my mercy. There is but one danger which can threaten us. It is that he should strike before we are ready to do so. Another day, 2 at the most, and I have my case complete. But until then, guard your charge as closely as ever a fond mother watched her ailing child. Your mission today has justified itself, and yet I could almost wish that you had not left his side. Hark!
A terrible scream, a prolonged yell of horror and anguish burst out of the silence of the moor. That frightful cry turned the blood to ice in my veins. Holmes had sprung to his feet, and I saw his dark, athletic outline at the door of the hut, his shoulders stooping, his head thrust forward, his face peering into the darkness. The cry had been loud on account of its vehemence, but it had pealed out from somewhere far off on the shadowy plain. Now it burst upon our ears, nearer, louder, more urgent than before.
Where is it? Where is it, Watson?
There, I think.
No. There!
Again, the agonized cry swept through the silent night, louder and much nearer than ever. And a new sound mingled with it, a deep, muttered rumble, musical and yet menacing, rising and falling like the low, constant murmur of the sea.
The hound. Come, Watson, come. Great heavens, if we are too late.
He had started running swiftly over the moor, and I had followed at his heels. But now from somewhere among the broken ground, immediately in front of us, there came one last despairing yell, and then a dull, heavy thud. We halted and listened. Not another sound broke the heavy silence of the windless night. I saw Holmes put his hand to his forehead like a man distracted. He stamped his feet upon the ground.
He has beaten us, Watson. We are too late.
No, surely not.
Fool that I was to hold my hand. And you, Watson, see what comes of abandoning your charge. But by heaven, if the worst has happened, we'll avenge him.
Blindly, we ran through the gloom, blundering against boulders, forcing our way through gorse bushes, panting up hills and rushing down slopes, heading always in the direction whence those dreadful sounds had come. At every rise, Holmes looked eagerly around him, but the shadows were thick upon the moor, and nothing moved upon its dreary face.
Can you see anything?
Nothing.
But hark, what is that?
A low moan had fallen upon our ears. There it was again, upon our left. On that side, a ridge of rocks ended in a sheer cliff which overlooked a stone-strewn slope. Aunt's jagged face was spread-eagled some dark, irregular object. As we ran toward it, the vague outline hardened into a definite shape. It was a prostrate man, face downward upon the ground, the head doubled under him at a horrible angle, the shoulders rounded and the body hunched together as if in the act of throwing a somersault. So grotesque was the attitude that I could not for the instant realize that that moan had been the passing of his soul. Not a whisper, not a rustle rose now from the dark figure over which we now stooped. Holmes laid his hand upon him and held it up again with an exclamation of horror. The gleam of the match which he struck shone upon his clotted fingers, and upon the ghastly pool which widened slowly from the crushed skull of the victim. And it shone upon something else which turned our hearts sick and faint within us. The body of Sir Henry Baskerville. There was no chance of either of us forgetting that peculiar ruddy tweed suit, the very one which he had worn on the first morning we had seen him in Baker Street. We caught the one clear glimpse of it, and then the match flickered and went out, even as a hope had gone out of our souls. Holmes groaned, and his face glimmered white through the darkness. The brute! The brute! Oh, Holmes, I shall never forgive myself for having left him to his fate.
I am more to blame than you, Watson. In order to have my case well-rounded and complete, I have thrown away the life of my client. It is the greatest blow which has befallen me in my career. But how could I know that he would risk his life alone upon the moor in the face of all my warnings?
That we should have heard his screams. My God, those screams, and yet have been unable to save him. Where is this brute of a hound which drove him to his death? It may be lurking among these rocks at this instant. And Stapleton, where is he? He shall answer for this deed.
He shall. I will see to that. Uncle and nephew have been murdered. The one frightened to death by the very sight of a beast which he thought to be supernatural. The other driven to his end in his wild fight to escape from it. But now we have to prove the connection between the man and the beast. Save from what we heard, we cannot even swear to the existence of the latter, since Sir Henry has evidently died from the fall. But by heavens, cunning as he is, the fellow shall be in my power before another day is past.
We stood with bitter hearts on either side of the mangled body, overwhelmed by this sudden and irrevocable disaster which had brought all our long and weary labors to so piteous an end. Then, as the moon rose, we climbed to the top of the rocks over which our poor friend had fallen. And from the summit, we gazed out over the shadowy moor, half silver and half gloom. Far away, miles off, in the direction of Grimpen, a single steady yellow light was shining. It could only come from the lonely abode of the Stapletons. With a bitter curse, I shook my fist at it as I gazed. Why should we not seize him at once?
Our case is not complete. The fellow is wary and cunning to the last degree. It is not what we know, but what we can prove. If we make one false move, the villain may escape us yet.
What can we do?
There will be plenty for us to do tomorrow. Tonight, we can only perform the last offices to our poor friend.
Together, we made our way down the precipitous slope and approached the body, black and clear against the silvered stones. The agony of those contorted limbs struck me with a spasm of pain and blurred my eyes with tears. We must send for help, Holmes. We cannot carry him all the way to the hall.
A beard. A beard. The man has a beard.
A beard?
It is not the baronet. It is... Why, it is my neighbor, the convict.
With feverish haste, we had turned the body over, and that dripping beard was pointing up to the cold, clear moon. There could be no doubt about the beetling forehead, the sunken animal eyes. It was indeed the same face which had glared at me upon the light of the candle from over the rock, the face of Selden, the criminal. Then, in an instant, it was all clear to me. I remembered how the baronet had told me that he had handed his old wardrobe over to Barrymore. Barrymore had passed it on in order to help Selden in his escape. Boots, shirt, cap, it was all Sir Henry's. The tragedy was still black enough, but this man had at least deserved death by the laws of his country. I told Holmes how the matter stood, my heart bubbling over with thankfulness and joy.
Then the clothes have been the poor man's death. It is clear enough that the hound has been laid on from some article of Sir Henry's. The boot, which was abstracted in the hotel in all probability, and so ran this man down. There is one very singular thing, however. How came Selden in the darkness to know that the hound was on his trail?
He heard him.
To hear a hound upon the moor would not work a hard man like this convict into such a paroxysm of terror that he would risk recapture by screaming wildly for help. By his cries, he must have run a long way after he knew the animal was on his track. How did he know?
A greater mystery to me is why this hound, presuming that all our conjectures are
I
correct.
presume nothing.
Well then, why this hound should be loose tonight. I suppose it does not always run loose upon the moor. Stapleton would not let it go unless he had reason to think that Sir Henry would be there.
My difficulty is the more formidable of the two, for I think that we shall very shortly get an explanation of yours, while mine may remain forever a mystery. The question now is, what shall we do with the poor wretch's body? We cannot leave it here for the foxes and the raven.
I suggest that we put it in one of the huts until we can communicate with the police.
Exactly. I have no doubt that you and I can carry it so far. Hello, Watson. What's this? It's the man himself. By all that's wonderful and audacious, not a word to show your suspicion. Not a word, or my plans crumble to the ground.
A figure was approaching us over the moor, and I saw the dull red glow of a cigar. The moon shone upon him, and I could distinguish the dapper shape and jaunty walk of the naturalist. He stopped when he saw us, and then came on again.
Why, Dr. Watson, that's not you, is it? You're the last man that I should have expected to see out on the moor at this time of night. But dear me, what's this? Somebody's hurt. No, don't tell me that was our dear friend Sir Henry.
He hurried past me and stooped over the dead man. I heard a sharp intake of his breath, and a cigar fell from his fingers.
Who's this?
It is Selden, the man who escaped from Princetown.
Stapleton turned a ghastly face upon us, but by a supreme effort he had overcome his amazement and his disappointment. He looked sharply from Holmes to me.
Dear me, what a very shocking affair. How did he die?
He appears to have broken his neck by falling over these rocks. My friend and I were strolling on the moor when we heard a cry.
I heard a cry also. That's what brought me out. I was uneasy about Sir Henry.
Why about Sir Henry in particular?
Because I had suggested that he should come over. When he did not come, I was surprised, and naturally I became alarmed for his safety when I heard cries upon the moor. By the way, did you hear anything else beside a cry?
No. Did you?
No.
What do you mean, then?
Oh, you know the stories that the peasants tell about the phantom hound and so on. It is said to be heard at night upon the moor. I was wondering if there were any evidence of such a sound tonight.
We heard nothing of the kind.
And what is your theory of this poor fellow's death?
I have no doubt that anxiety and exposure have driven him off his head. He had rushed about the moor in a crazy state and eventually fallen over here and broken his neck.
Oh, yes, that seems to be the most reasonable theory. What do you think about it, Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
You are quick at identification.
We've been expecting you in these parts since Dr. Watson came down. You're in time to see a tragedy.
Yes, indeed. I have no doubt that my friend's explanation will cover the facts. I will take an unpleasant remembrance back to London with me tomorrow.
Oh, you return tomorrow?
That is my intention.
I hope your visit has cast some light upon these occurrences which have puzzled us.
One cannot always have the success for which one hopes. An investigator needs facts, not legends or rumors. It has not been a satisfactory case.
My friend spoke in his frankest and most unconcerned manner. Stapleton still looked hard at him. Then he turned to me.
I would suggest carrying this poor fellow to my house, but it would give my sister such a fright that I do not feel justified in doing it. I think that if we're pulling something over his face, he'll be safe until morning.
And so it was arranged. Resisting Stapleton's offer of hospitality, Holmes and I set off to Baskerville Hall, leaving the naturalist to return alone. Looking back, we saw the figure moving slowly away over the broad wall, and behind him that one black smudge on the silvered slope which showed where the man was lying who had come so horribly to his end.
We're at close grips at last. What a nerve the fellow has. How he pulled himself together in the face of what must have been a paralyzing shock when he found that the wrong man had fallen a victim to his plot. I told you in London, Watson, and I tell you now again that we have never had a foeman more worthy of our steel.
I'm sorry that he has seen you.
And so was I at first, but there was no getting out of it.
What effect do you think it will have upon his plans now that he knows you are here?
It may cause him to be more cautious, or it may drive him to desperate measures at once. Like most clever criminals, he may be too confident in his own cleverness and imagine that he has completely deceived us.
Why should we not arrest him at once?
My dear Watson, you were born to be a man of action. Your instinct is always to do something energetic. But supposing, for argument's sake, that we had him arrested tonight, what on earth should we be for that? We could prove nothing against him. There's the devilish cunning of it. If he were acting through a human agent, we could get some evidence. But if we were to drag this great dog to the light of day, it would not help us in putting a rope around the neck of its master.
Surely we have a case.
Not a shadow of one, only surmise and conjecture. We should be laughed out of court if we came with such a story and such evidence.
There's Sir Charles' death.
Found dead without a mark upon him. You and I know that he died of sheer fright, and we know also what frightened him. But how are we to get 12 stolid jurymen to know it? What signs are there of a hound? Where are the marks of its fangs? Of course, we know that a hound does not bite a dead body, and that Sir Charles was dead before ever the brute overtook him. But we have to prove all this, and we are not in a position to do it.
Well then, tonight?
We are not much better off tonight. Again, there was no direct connection between the hound and the man's death. We never saw the hound. We heard it, but we could not prove that it was running upon this man's trail. There is a complete absence of motive. No, my dear fellow, we must reconcile ourselves to the fact that we have no case at present, and that it is worth our while to run any risk in order to establish one.
And how do you propose to do so?
I have great hopes of what Mrs. Laura Lyons may do for us when the position of affairs is made clear to her, and I have my own plan as well. Sufficient for tomorrow is the evil thereof, but I hope before the day is past to have the upper hand at last.
Are you coming up to Baskerville Hall?
Yes, I see no reason for further concealment. But one last word, Watson. Say nothing of the hound to Sir Henry. Let him think that Selden's death was as Stapleton would have us believe. He will have a better nerve for the ordeal which he will have to undergo tomorrow when he is engaged, if I remember your report right, to dine with these people.
And so am I.
Then you must excuse yourself, and he must go alone. That will be easily arranged. And now, if we are too late for dinner, I think that we are both ready for our suppers.
End of chapter 12. Chapter 13, Fixing the Nets. Sir Henry was more pleased than surprised to see Sherlock Holmes, for he had for some days been expecting that recent events would bring him down from London. He did raise his eyebrows, however, when he found that my friend had neither any luggage nor any explanations for its absence. Between us, we soon supplied his wants, and then, over a belated supper, we explained to the baronet as much of our experience as it seemed desirable that he should know. But first, I had the unpleasant duty of breaking the news to Barrymore and his wife. To him, it may have been an unmitigated relief, but she wept bitterly in her apron. To all the world, he was the man of violence, half animal and half demon. But to her, he always remained the little willful boy of her own girlhood, the child who had clung to her hand. Evil indeed is the man who has not one woman to mourn him.
I've been moping in the house all day since Watson went off in the morning. I guess I should have some credit, for I have kept my promise. If I hadn't sworn not to go about alone, I might have had a more lively evening, for I had a message from Stapleton asking me over there.
I have no doubt that you would have had a more lively evening. By the way, I don't suppose you appreciate that we have been mourning over you, having broken your neck.
How was that?
The poor wretch was dressed in your clothes. I fear your servant who gave them to him may get into trouble with the police.
That is unlikely. There was no mark on any of them, as far as I know.
That's lucky for him. In fact, it's lucky for all of you, since you are all on the wrong side of the law in this matter. I am not sure that as a conscientious detective, my first duty is not to arrest the whole household. Watson's reports are most incriminating documents.
But how about the case? Have you made anything out of the tangle? I don't know that Watson and I are much the wiser since we came down.
I think that I shall be in a position to make the situation rather more clear to you before long. It has been an exceedingly difficult and most complicated business. There are several points upon which we still want light, but it is coming all the same.
We've had one experience, as Watson has no doubt told you. We heard the hound on the moor, so I can swear that it is not all empty superstition. I had something to do with dogs when I was out west, and I know one when I hear one. If you can muzzle that one and put a chain on him, I'll be ready to swear you are the greatest detective of all time.
I think I will muzzle him and chain him all right if you will give me your help.
Whatever you tell me to do, I will do.
Very good. And I will ask you also to do it blindly, without always asking for the reason.
Just as you like.
If you will do this, I think the chances are that our little problem will soon be solved. I have no doubt.
He stopped suddenly and stared fixedly up over my head into the air. The lamp beat upon his face, and so intent was it, and so still, that it might have been that of a clear-cut classical statue, a personification of alertness and expectation.
What is it?
I could see as he looked down that he was repressing some internal emotion. His features were still composed, but his eyes shone with amused exultation. He waved his hand toward the line of portraits which covered the opposite wall.
Excuse the admiration of a connoisseur. Watson won't allow that I know anything of art, but that is mere jealousy, because our views upon the subject differ. Now, these are a really very fine series of portraits.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say so. I don't pretend to know much about these things, and I'd be a better judge of a horse or a steer than of a picture. I didn't know that you found time for such things.
I know what is good when I see it, and I see it now. That's a Kneller, I'll swear. That lady in the blue silk over yonder, and the stout gentleman with the wig ought to be a Reynolds. They are all family portraits, I presume?
Every one.
Do you know the names?
Barrymore has been coaching me in them, and I think I can say my lessons fairly well.
Who is the gentleman with the telescope?
That is Rear Admiral Baskerville, who served under Rodney in the West Indies. The man with the blue coat and the roll of paper is Sir William Baskerville, who was chairman of committees of the House of Commons under Pitt.
And this cavalier opposite to me, the one with the black velvet and the lace.
Ah, you have a right to know about him. That is the cause of all the mischief, the wicked Hugo, who started the Hound of Baskervilles. We're not likely to forget him.
I gazed with interest and some surprise upon the portrait.
Dear me, he seems a quiet, meek-mannered man enough, but I dare say that there was a lurking devil in his eyes. I had pictured him as a more robust and ruffianly person.
There's no doubt about the authenticity, for the name and the date, 1647, are on the back of the canvas.
Holmes said little more, but the picture of old Hugo seemed to have a fascination for him, and his eyes were continually fixed upon it during supper. It was not until later, when Sir Henry had gone to his room, that I was able to follow the trend of his thoughts. He led me back into the banqueting hall, his bedroom candle in his hand, and he held it up against the time-stained portrait on the wall.
Do you see anything there?
I looked at the broad-plumed hat, the curling love locks, the white lace collar, and the straight, severe face which was framed between them. It was not a brutal countenance, but it was prim, hard, and stern, with a firm-set, thin-lipped mouth and a coldly intolerant eye.
Is it like anyone you know?
There is something of Sir Henry about the jaw.
Just a suggestion, perhaps, but wait an instant.
He stood upon a chair, and holding up the light in his left hand, he curved his right arm over the broad hat and around the long ringlets. The face of Stapleton had sprung out of the canvas. I cried in amazement.
You see it now. My eyes have been trained to examine faces and not their trimmings. It is the first quality of a criminal investigator that he should see through a disguise.
But this is marvelous. It might be his portrait.
Yes, it is an interesting instance of a throwback, which appears to be both physical and spiritual. A study of family portraits is enough to convert a man to the doctrine of reincarnation. The fellow is a Baskerville, that is evident.
With designs upon the succession.
Exactly. The chance of the picture has supplied us with one of our most obvious missing links. We have him, Watson. We have him, and I dare swear that before tomorrow night he will be fluttering in our net as helpless as one of his own butterflies. A pin, a cork, and a card, and we add him to the Baker Street collection.
He burst into one of his rare fits of laughter as he turned away from the picture. I've not heard him laugh often, and it has always boded ill to somebody. I was up betimes in the morning, but Holmes was afoot earlier still, for I saw him as I dressed coming up the drive.
Yes, we should have a full day today. The nets are all in place, and the drag is about to begin. We'll know before the day is out whether we have caught our big, lean-jawed pike, or whether he has got through the meshes.
Have you been on the moor already?
I have sent a report from Grimpen to Princetown as to the death of Selden. I think I can promise that none of you will be troubled in the matter. And I have also communicated with my faithful Cartwright, who would certainly have pined away at the door of my hut as a dog does at his master's grave, if I had not set his mind at rest about my safety.
What is the next move?
To see Sir Henry. Ah, here he is.
Ah, you look like a general who is planning a battle with his chief of the staff.
That is the exact situation. Watson was asking for orders.
And so do I.
Very good. You are engaged, as I understand, to dine with our friends the Stapletons tonight.
I hope that you will come also. They are very hospitable people, and I am sure they would be very glad to see you.
I fear that Watson and I must go to London.
To London?
Yes, I think that we should be more useful there at the present juncture.
I hoped that you were going to see me through this business. The hall and the moor are not very pleasant places when one is alone.
My dear fellow, you must trust me implicitly and do exactly what I tell you. You can tell your friends that we should have been happy to have come with you, but that urgent business required us to be in town. We hope very soon to return to Devonshire. Will you remember to give them that message?
If you insist upon it.
There is no alternative, I assure you.
I saw by the baronet's clouded brow that he was deeply hurt by what he regarded as our desertion.
When do you desire to go?
Immediately after breakfast. We will drive into Coombe Tracy, but Watson will leave his things as a pledge that he will come back to you. Watson, you will send a note to Stapleton to tell him that you regret that you cannot come.
I have a good mind to go to London with you. Why should I stay here alone?
Because it is your post of duty. Because you gave me your word that you would do as you were told, and I tell you to stay.
All right, then. I'll stay.
One more direction. I wish you to drive to Merripit House. Send back your carriage, however, and let them know that you intend to walk home.
To walk across the moor?
Yes.
But that is the very thing which you have so often cautioned me not to do.
This time you may do it with safety. If I had not every confidence in your nerve and courage, I would not suggest it, but it is essential that you should do it.
Then I will do it.
And as you value your life, do not go across the moor in any direction save along the straight path which leads from Merripit House to the Grimpen Road, and is your natural way home.
I will do just what you say.
Very good. I should be glad to get away as soon after breakfast as possible so as to reach London in the afternoon.
I was much astounded by this program, though I remembered that Holmes had said to Stapleton on the night before that his visit would terminate next day. It had not crossed my mind, however, that he would wish me to go with him, nor could I understand how we could both be absent at a moment which he himself declared to be critical. There was nothing for it, however, but implicit obedience. So we bade goodbye to our rueful friends, and a couple of hours afterwards we were at the station of Coombe Tracy and had dispatched the trap upon its return journey. A small boy was waiting upon the platform.
Any orders, sir?
You will take this train to town, Cartwright. The moment you arrive, you will send a wire to Sir Henry Baskerville in my name to say that if he finds the pocketbook which I have dropped, he is to send it by registered post to Baker Street.
Yes, sir.
And ask the station office if there is a message for me.
The boy returned with a telegram which Holmes handed to me. It ran,
Wire received. Coming down with unsigned warrant. Arrive 5:40. Lestrade.
That is an answer to mine of this morning. He is the best of the professionals, I think, and we may need his assistance. Now, Watson, I think that we cannot employ our time better than by calling upon your acquaintance, Mrs. Laura Lyons.
His plan of campaign was beginning to be evident. He would use a baronet in order to convince the Stapletons that we were really gone, which, meanwhile, we would actually return at the instant when we were likely to be needed. That telegram from London, if mentioned by Sir Henry to the Stapletons, must remove the last suspicions from their minds. Already I seem to see our nets drawing closer around him. Mrs. Laura Lyons was in her office, and Sherlock Holmes opened his interview with frankness and directness, which considerably amazed her.
I am investigating the circumstances which attended the death of the late Sir Charles Baskerville. My friend here, Dr. Watson, has informed me of what you have communicated and also of what you have withheld in connection with that matter.
What have I withheld?
You have confessed that you asked Sir Charles to be at the gate at 10 o'clock. We know that that was the place and hour of his death. You have withheld what the connection is between these events.
There is no connection.
In that case, the coincidence must indeed be an extraordinary one. But I think that we shall succeed in establishing a connection after all. I wish to be perfectly frank with you, Mrs. Lyons. We regard this case as one of murder, and the evidence may implicate not only your friend, Mr. Stapleton, but his wife as well.
His wife?
The fact is no longer a secret. The person who has passed for his sister is really his wife.
His wife? His wife? He is not a married man. Prove it to me. Prove it to me. And if you can do so...
I have come prepared to do so. Here is a photograph of the couple taken in York 4 years ago. It is endorsed Mr. and Mrs. Vandeleur, but you will have no difficulty in recognizing him, and her also, if you know her by sight. Here are 3 written descriptions by trustworthy witnesses of Mr. and Mrs. Vandeleur, who at that time kept St. Oliver's private school. Read them, and see if you can doubt the identity of these people.
Mr. Holmes, this man had offered me marriage on condition that I could get a divorce from my husband. He has lied to me, the villain, in every conceivable way. Not one word of truth has he ever told me. And why? Why? I imagined that all was for my own sake, but now I see that I was never anything but a tool in his hands. Why should I preserve faith with him who never kept any with me? Why should I try to shield him from the consequences of his own wicked acts? Ask me what you like, and there is nothing which I shall hold back. One thing I swear to you, and that is when I wrote the letter, I never dreamed of any harm to the old gentleman who had been my kindest friend.
I entirely believe you, madam. The recital of these events must be very painful to you, and perhaps it will make it easier if I tell you what occurred, and you can check me if I make any material mistake. The sending of this letter was suggested to you by Stapleton.
He dictated it.
I presume that the reason he gave was that you would receive help from Sir Charles for the legal expenses connected with your divorce?
Exactly.
And then after you had sent the letter, he dissuaded you from keeping the appointment.
He told me that it would hurt his self-respect that any other man should find the money for such an object, and that though he was a poor man himself, he would devote his last penny to removing the obstacles which divided us.
He appears to be a very consistent character. And then you heard nothing until you read the reports of the death in the paper.
No.
And he made you swear to say nothing about your appointment with Sir Charles?
He did. He said that the death was a very mysterious one, and that I should certainly be suspected if the facts came out. He frightened me into remaining silent.
Quite so. But you had your suspicions.
I knew him. If he had kept faith with me, I should always have done so with him.
I think that on the whole, you have had a fortunate escape. You have had him in your power, and he knew it, and yet you are alive. You have been walking for some months very near to the edge of a precipice. We must wish you good morning now, Mrs. Lyons, and it is probable that you will very shortly hear from us again.
We bid her good morning and stood waiting for the arrival of the express from town.
Our case becomes rounded off, and difficulty after difficulty thins away in front of us. I shall soon be in the possession of being able to put into a single connected narrative one of the most singular and sensational crimes of modern times. Students of criminology will remember the analogous incidents in Godno in Little Russia in the year 66, and of course there are the Anderson murders in North Carolina. But this case possesses some features which are entirely its own. Even now, we have no clear case against this very wily man, but I shall be very much surprised if it is not clear enough before we go to bed this night.
The London Express came roaring into the station, and a small, wiry bulldog of a man had sprung from the first-class carriage. We all three shook hands, and I saw at once from the reverential way in which Lestrade gazed at my companion that he had learned a good deal since the days when they had first worked together. I could well remember the scorn which the theories of the reasoner used then to excite in a practical man.
Anything good?
The biggest thing for years. We have 2 hours before we need to think of starting. I think we might employ it in getting some dinner. And then, Lestrade, we will take the London fog out of your throat by giving you a breath of the pure night air of Dartmoor. Never been there? Well, I don't suppose you will forget your first visit.
End of chapter 13.
We'd like to thank you for once again joining us for the Hound of the Baskervilles. We would also once again like to thank all of the essential workers who at this time are working to keep us safe, medical personnel, people who are stocking shelves, things like that, to make sure that we are able to bring our work to you to hopefully take your mind off of things for a little while. Please check out your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare Approves, his Facebook page, Shakespeare Approves, and please check out his upcoming production in only 2 days' time, Midsummer Night's Dream, A Gay Old Time. That is June 3rd at 7:05, and you will see a few familiar faces there. Also, please join us for our continued Shakespeare series. We are back on Saturday evening with Julius Caesar, and please join us next Monday evening for the final edition of the Hound of the Baskervilles. Thank you and good night.